Alrighty, everyone, this is meteorologist Timmy Albertson here with you guys for a quick little update here on the tropics. As mentioned, we are tracking Hurricane Lee as it makes its way towards parts of the New England coastline and into the Canadian Maritimes. The conditions of Lee are, well, that it is going to be gradually weakening. But the question is going to be how much will it weaken before it makes its way towards land. Let's take a look here at the current conditions right now with Hurricane Lee. This is about as of a couple of hours ago here. We'll probably have another update coming out very shortly here. But winds are about 80 miles an hour. So again, this is not a strong hurricane in terms of maximum wind speeds. In fact, it's just a Category 1 hurricane. If you look below me on the satellite imagery, there's been some drier air and a lot of wind shear that has really just kind of eroded away the southern part of this hurricane. So really, most of the activity is on the northern part. Not to say that there's nothing going on in the southern part, just not quite as much. Convection remains kind of not very well organized down in the southern part there. Wind field is also expanding a little bit here with Lee. Again, we talked about this, that when these kind of stronger hurricanes do tend to weaken, their wind fields do expand a little bit, and part of that has to do with some conservation of angular momentum. So we are seeing that although Lee's winds are decreasing, the wind field is expanding, and it's actually pretty wide, at least that tropical storm force winds. That's what that yellow color is there on the track. So what's Lee going to be doing as we go through about the next 24 hours or so? Well, it's going to continue to make its way towards the north, moving at a pretty decent speed, about 20 miles an hour, which for a tropical system is a pretty good speed. Might actually even maybe increase that speed a little bit more. But it's also going to be weakening here. It's going to run into much colder water temperatures. That shear is going to continue to affect it, and so will that drier air. So a lot of things working against Hurricane Lee at this time. So it's likely not going to be getting any stronger than what it is now. However, it will be making its way towards land. There are tropical storm warnings. That's that blue, and we're going to take a look at those warnings here a little bit more in just a moment here. But at least that blue outline, the tropical storm warnings along the immediate coast stretches all the way from Boston, going up towards all of Maine, heading into parts of Nova Scotia there, especially the southwestern part. And then there's tropical storm watches that are in effect. That's that yellow color that you see there. Now, there are some hurricane watches that are in effect right now. I do not believe there are any active hurricane warnings. And part of the reason for that is that Lee is not maybe expected to be a hurricane when it does make its official landfall. So winds might be below barely what is needed for a hurricane, which is 74-mile-an-hour wind. Not to say that they can't see hurricane force wind gusts, and that is very likely going to be the case in some of these areas. But again, this is an area that is very common to seeing kind of these strong storms, especially during the wintertime, that just bring quite a bit in the way of wind. So this is a geographically an area that is prone to this and is always pretty much well handled for it there with these strong storms that come off the ocean there. Not to say that there's not going to be any effects from it. Yes, we're talking probably will be at least maybe a little bit in the way of some coastal flooding, which is to be expected with most landfalling tropical systems. Certainly high winds and maybe a little bit in the way of storm surge. What's going to make this interesting, though, is that Lee is going to begin to undergo a process later on tomorrow where it goes from a tropical system to a non-tropical system. So in meteorology, some of the words you might hear thrown out are extratropical or post-tropical. Basically, those both mean not tropical anymore. And I know that sounds weird. Hurricanes are an area of low pressure, but they have a slightly different structure than the normal low pressures that bring cold fronts through. So again, we won't go into physics of that tonight, but certainly something very interesting nonetheless. And that's why on this National Hurricane Center forecast track, and again, folks, this is the forecast that is used across most meteorology outlets here. And the reason I explained earlier is because when it comes to hurricanes, it's just easiest to have a unified forecast, all right? And just because they cover such a wide distance, they obey a slightly different set of laws, hurricanes do. And so, like I said, it's just better to have a kind of a general forecast track, which is why pretty much everyone uses the National Hurricane Center's tracks there. And that's what we're using here on this graphic. You can see how on those icons, they go from black to white. The white color is post-tropical or no longer a full tropical system. So it can be anything from subtropical, post-tropical, extratropical. Extratropical is what a normal low pressure is that we get here in the mid-latitudes that would bring a cold front through or something along those lines. So a lot of jargon out there, a lot of meteorology terms, but basically what it's saying is that it's a tropical storm, it's a hurricane now, it's tropical in characteristics, but after it makes landfall, it'll begin the transition away from the tropical characteristics to becoming a regular type of low pressure system that we would deal with in the mid latitudes. Slightly different structure, still the same storm, but not the same storm, if that makes any sense. It's slightly different in how it's structured. So that's why those icons are in white. Again, Lee is going to move very quickly, so we're not expecting that Lee is going to be hanging around the East Coast all weekend. As a matter of fact, the peak parts of this system are going to be pretty much tonight going through tomorrow, mainly during the day tomorrow, especially up along Maine and Nova Scotia. And then we'll be seeing, those effects moving away. And by the time we get towards Monday afternoon, out in the open waters, way off the Labrador, Newfoundland coast, kind of maybe making some swells up towards Greenland, but again, in a weakening phase. So that's kind of the overall track here, kind of a quick moving system. All right, let's go ahead and take a look at the radar, shall we? See what we got going on there. And already some of that rain is beginning to arrive into New England. So we'll go ahead and we will flip over the screen here to our handy dandy radar. Let's take a look at the wind field. That is a wide wind field. Again, we saw it there on the on that Hurricane Center, on the National Hurricane Center graphic. This is it here again. Let's measure it out, shall we? Let's zoom out a little bit. Again, as I mentioned before, when strong hurricanes tend to weaken, their wind fields tend to expand. Again, there's processes. This is not unusual. So even though the winds are decreasing, the wind field itself is expanding. The winds are not increasing, but just where the tropical storm force winds and the hurricane force winds are being felt here. Let's go ahead and time this out, or not time this out. Let's go ahead and see exactly how wide it is. If we draw a circle there from the center, again, we tend to see the strongest winds on the eastern side of a hurricane. Again, that has to do with directional movement in the way the hurricane themselves rotate with the wind flow. 100 miles, 106 miles out from the center. Okay, that's a pretty big wind field for only 80-mile-an-hour winds. So we're talking about hurricane force winds. Hurricane force winds 74 mile an hour or greater. So if the maximum winds are 80 miles an hour, we can see that there's not a very tight gradient, here that we're dealing with. So pretty much that circle is those hurricane force winds, but they're only between about 74 and 80 miles an hour if we go based off the estimation here. So that's kind of how that is shaped out. Not quite as strong on the western side, but you get the idea. The tropical storm force winds, see how far those extend out. Take a look at that, folks. We're talking about 320 miles out from the center. So that is a very large wind field. So even though the center of Lee is going to be staying over open waters overnight tonight, that wind field is still going to be grazing up against the New England coastline. That's why there's those tropical storm warnings that you see there, and that's what that yellow color is. So if we would go ahead and zoom in a little bit and take a little bit of a look here, you see those tropical storm force warning, or those tropical storm warnings extend all the way from Presque Isle, Maine, going back down towards the coast here. So tropical storm force warnings, go ahead and double check that, yeah. Tropical storm warnings, again, tropical storm conditions. And we're not talking hurricane conditions. Again, if we bring out our Saffir-Simpson scale, I'll pull this up here again. Some of you guys have probably seen this a million times, but this is the Saffir-Simpson scale. This is what we use to rate hurricanes by. So again, tropical storm is the category below hurricane. It's 39 to 73 mile an hour winds. Again, tropical systems are rated on their wind speed, their maximum wind speed solely. All right, just makes things simple. So category 5 is the strongest. Lee was a category 5 briefly on Friday morning, not this Friday, but last week. It was a category 5 briefly, but ran to wind shear and it just kind of struggled to recover a little bit after that. So now it's right now is a low end category, or about a mid-range category 1 hurricane with winds of 80 miles an hour. So that puts in the category 1 status. Tropical storm, 39 to 73 miles an hour. So that's what those tropical storm warnings are for. They're not expecting hurricane conditions. Again, as we talked about, Lee might not actually be a hurricane when it makes landfall. It could be a tropical storm. It might even not be a technical tropical storm. It could be extratropical by that point with tropical storm force winds. But you get the idea. That's why there's no hurricane warning. So these are all tropical storm warnings. And again, it's because of that wind field. Let's go back to the radar here, and you can see how that wind field already is kind of grazing up against parts of the islands, not the islands, Cape Cod, there we go, over in Massachusetts. So let's take a look at some of the buoys here, see what we got wind speed wise, gusting to 42 miles an hour, sustained right now at 33 miles an hour. So It looks like, for the most part, this wind radius is kind of holding up. Might be a little over for part of the western, but again, we're kind of drawing a circle more or less, so you get the idea. Those tropical storm conditions are already beginning to work their way up onto the cape there of Massachusetts. Let's go ahead and see if we can't pull out another buoy. There is one right here that is not too far away from the strong tropical storm force winds. It's reporting gusts right now 40 mile an hour sustained wind. So that is tropical storm force winds with gusts about 58 miles an hour. And this was apparently a report as of about 30 minutes ago. So we'll keep an eye on this. This is buoy 44011. We'll go ahead and kind of see here, what the waves are. Well, no, the wave height is listed there, at least on this particular one, about 23 feet. 23-foot waves. That's a pretty good wave. Now, normally these buoys do take pictures, but it's nighttime. There's nothing to see. So we don't have pictures right now. But I can tell you that it looks probably very windy, very wavy out there, and probably a little bit wet. So let's go ahead here. And so that's that main buoy. And again, we're going to take another look at that tomorrow, especially as we're expecting that overnight tonight, the center of Lee is probably going to pass pretty much directly over that. So I mean, that's pretty good to get such a good measurement out in the open waters like that. Just kind of coincidence that this buoy just happens to be where that center is going to pass close to. So it'll be some pretty good data we'll get from that. Let's take a look at this buoy. Is this one reporting waves? This is interesting. This one only has wave heights of about 6 feet. But let's take a look at this one that's off the coast there, the Cape Cod coast. Wave height there only reported to be about 5 feet. So we go from 23 feet further out in the open waters, which is kind of to be expected a little bit, to, well, it's a little bit protected by land. Of course, I'm pointing at a screen here. You can't see it. It's the same screen, though, that you see on here. But if we were to go ahead and flip this off, you can kind of take a little bit of a look at both of those buoys right here. We took a look at this one. Whoop, nope, not that. This buoy right here, let's click on it. Waves about 6 feet. And this one right here had waves of about 5 feet, 4.5 to 5 feet. But take a look here. These are kind of protected a little bit by some land. Again, there's Nantucket, and here's the rest of the Massachusetts Cape. So probably getting a little bit in the way of some kind of minor breaks just based on where that land is. But regardless, we do see that out in the open waters, those waves are pretty good, which tends to be the case. Let's see what this buoy is saying up here. Here we got waves of about 10 feet. So this particular buoy, 44018, which is also showing darkness for its picture, is getting gusts of 44 miles an hour already. And the waves, though, are only about 9.5 to 10 feet. So again, these waves are a bit higher, even though it's further out. Again, it's not as protected by land here. So again, we're going to be seeing some high waves across this area. But folks, keep in mind that this area gets high waves. I mean, there's nothing too unusual from it. So let's take a look here at the radar, because you're probably wondering where all the rain is with this tropical system. Well, there is rain. When we took a look at the satellite imagery, you saw that a lot of the southern part of this storm was just sheared away. There's not much there. So we're mostly going to be seeing a lot of that rain here on the northern side. So let's see if we can't flip up. Let's see if the MRS radar here is picking it up. It's just still a little too far away from land to really pick it up here. But we do see that already some of the outer bands here, some of the initial rain is already reaching up around Nantucket and the Massachusetts Cape there. So we'll go back to the single radar since we don't have full radar coverage yet of this area. And it is going to stay rainy there, and it's going to be rainy with this system. Don't get me wrong. I know we're talking a lot about the winds, but there will be some rain. But, a lot of it's going to be on the northern side. Not going to be much on the southern side. So we'll be watching that as we go our way through. So yes, it's going to be a rainy night up and down the New England coastline. Now, further inland, probably not so much, and that's just based on the way this storm is tracking. You can see if it's going to be going straight up to the north, you can see, kind of follow with your eyes how that's just going to kind of be grazing the New England coastline. So really with this storm, a lot of the biggest impacts are going to be along the immediate coastline, which is generally the case with most tropical systems. But unlike Idalia, where it held its intensity, as it went inland a little bit, all tropical systems weaken once they hit land. But because this one's not a category 3 right now, and because it's also moving pretty quickly, So you get the idea. We're not going to be seeing, widespread hurricane force winds going far inland, a little bit like kind of like what we saw off of Dahlia. Um, this is mainly just going to be tropical storm force winds. There are some hurricane watches that are still in effect for parts up here, just in case Lee decides it wants to hold its intensity. It makes it easier to upgrade the warning to a hurricane warning. But right now, the general consensus is that even if there were hurricane conditions, it would be very brief and very borderline hurricane. Let's put it for you that way. So where's the landfall looking likely? Nova Scotia. Nova Scotia at this point, province Canada. Not Halifax and Nova Scotia, but on the southwestern coast here of Nova Scotia. That's where the National Hurricane Center is expecting it, right around Yarmouth. Now, keep in mind here, folks, that, in this particular area, you can see there's not a lot of space between Maine, southern part of New Brunswick, and Nova Scotia. All right. So if this guy decides it wants to wobble a little bit, could bring that track a little further, to the west, or it could bring it a little further to the east. So places like Maine do still have the possibility of maybe seeing the landfall, but there's a lot of model agreement right now. That's not probably going to happen. And, based on the track and what we're seeing now, it's most likely area of the landfall is going to be probably southwestern Nova Scotia. If it manages to move a little bit to the west, that would put it probably in southern New Brunswick. And that's just because Nova Scotia ends right here. So if the track were to be a little further to the west, it would bring it into, probably the St. John area of New Brunswick. So we're not dealing with a wide, it's not like, Texas or something where it's, big state over a large area. Here it's kind of smaller states over a smaller area. So obviously, again, you're going to probably hear, still some uncertainty, places like New Brunswick, Nova Scotia, and Maine, but these are not far separated from each other. These are three state jurisdictions effectively that are relatively close to each other. But right now, the main likely landfall is probably going to be southwestern Nova Scotia. If it does jog a bit to the west, it could bypass the center, could actually still stay over water if it bypasses Nova Scotia. Ironically, it might be kind of doing a little bit of a turn as it rounds the curved coast there of Nova Scotia, so kind of interesting. But just coincidence, folks, just coincidence. But, either way, you get the idea that it probably will make a second landfall probably in New Brunswick if we follow this track exactly. So that's where we're probably going to see the strongest winds around that area from this system. But again, it's a pretty broad, large wind field, even though it's not a strong wind field. It still is pretty wide, so that's why those tropical warnings are there. Pretty cool, huh? We're going to have a fun weekend with this, especially when the sun comes up. We're going to get some great shots from some of these buoys, folks. There'll be some pretty cool shots there. And I know some of the other AWSC meteorologists are also up around that area, and we'll probably have some video to send back to us, so that should be pretty cool there to be watching. I know I'm kind of excited to see some of what they sent back and everything. We also got another tropical system out there, and this is a relatively new one. We talked about this one a few days ago. I talked about it was a disturbance coming off the West African coast. Much like Lee, it's also a Cape Verde hurricane. It's expected to be. Right now, it is Tropical Depression number 15, and it is expected to become our next named storm. Now, unlike Lee, it might not intensify quite as quickly. Remember with Lee, as soon as, we got it to tropical depression status, it got its number, very soon it was named Lee, got tropical storm status, and then it quickly intensified. This is actually the track of Lee. I know it's kind of hard to see with all these other tracks, but remember it was tropical depression right here. It was tropical depression 13, and then quickly it became a category 5 by this point. That is not a large space. I mean, we've seen, hurricanes intensify rapidly over short distances. Wilma back in 2004, I remember, boy, that was a wicked one. It went from a tropical storm to a category 5 hurricane in like 36 hours. And it rapidly intensified so much the eye was just 2 miles wide. It was fantastic, but it looked so funky on the satellite imagery because you had this big hurricane and this tiny, tiny little eye. So hurricanes can rapidly intensify quicker than what Lee did, that's for sure. Hurricane Charlie, my favorite hurricane, that and Andrew. Hurricane Andrew and Hurricane Charlie are my two favorite hurricanes. Hey, most meteorologists got a favorite hurricane. But yeah, Hurricane Charlie did the same thing right before landfall, went from a category 2 to a category 4 hurricane really quickly. And that changed the game a little bit. I remember that. I remember getting the update right before it made landfall. I remember looking at it and 145-mile-an-hour winds. I was like, oh, that's not a category 2. That's a category 4. So anyways, so this guy, number 14, I can't remember what the name is going to be. So for those of you who don't know, the names are actually predetermined. We have them on a list, and that list repeats every 6 years. Year 1, it'll go girl, boy, girl, boy, girl, boy names, and then the next year it goes boy, girl, boy, girl, boy, girl names. And then, so they use the same list, it repeats every 6 years. Every 6 years, the same list of names comes back, unless that hurricane did something record-breaking or something that set it apart from the others. Then they retire that name. Here's the example I give. Hurricane Allen in 1980. Strong hurricane, right? Made landfall category 5, pretty big hurricane. All right, they retired Allen. When the list came, when the list repeated in 1986, Allen was replaced by Andrew. Well, in 1986, Andrew was a tropical storm, didn't do much, so they recycled its name again for the 1992 season. Hurricane Andrew then hit southern Florida, causing extensive damage. Category 5 hurricane at landfall, pretty big one back in 92. They retired the name Andrew. Andrew was then replaced by the name Alex for the 1998 season. And then it came back in 2004 as Hurricane Alex, which I remember that one too. That was the first hurricane of the season, also the first name system of the 2004 season, Hurricane Alex. So that's what they do. So for example, Katrina, that name is not coming back on the list. It's been retired. All right, it's been replaced by something else. Ivan is another one from 2004. Isabel. I think even Fabian from 2003, Hurricane Fabian was retired. Wilma was retired. Charlie was retired. So yeah, so they replaced with new names. So that's just how it works. It makes things easier in meteorology. So that way, when I talk about Hurricane Andrew, you know I'm talking about Hurricane Andrew in 1992, not Tropical Storm Andrew from 1986. All right, that's just kind of how it goes. All right, so huge sidetrack. So this one's going to get a name. Obviously, we had Lee. So yeah, so this one will probably get an M name, and it's going to be a female name. So I can't remember what they have in store for it. But it'll probably get named tomorrow, or perhaps on Sunday. Regardless of the fact, it's going to probably slowly intensify a little bit, but then it could kind of quickly intensify, becoming maybe a Category 3 hurricane by the time we get towards let's see here, the 19th. So that'll be probably about Tuesday. So we'll take a look more about this one tomorrow. Especially we'll see if they name it or not. But this will be another interesting one to watch. Again, it's a Cape Verde hurricane. Those have a lot of room to work with. They have a lot. They travel a lot of ocean, so they tend to get pretty strong generally. Or you could be like Margot over here, who is just. This is a really interesting track. I haven't looked at the updated expected track. This is actually kind of interesting. They have it. It's like doing a double. It's like doing a double spiral. That's really cool. There's a high pressure that's going to be kind of blocking it right now. That's why it's kind of moving south. That ridge is going to move down to the south a little bit, and that's what's giving it that really cool spiral track here. So here it is. This is where it's been. Now the Hurricane Center is expecting it's going to turn, go like that, and then go like that. Boy, that is going to be interesting. That's pretty cool. I can't remember the last time I've seen something like. I mean, hurricanes do loop every now and then in their track. That's not unheard of. But that, just the way that that's expected to lay out, if it does, that's going to be kind of, because that's just kind of a really cool looking swirl. Yeah, it'd be pretty interesting, but it probably ain't going to intensify because that water is going to be upwelled so well. We talked about upwelling. It's when the waves, churn and churn and churn. They bring that cooler water from the, lower up. Bring the cooler water below up. Hurricanes don't like cooler water. So upwelling is, the waves. And, and oftentimes if you look at a temperature map of the ocean, sometimes you can, especially with strong hurricanes, you can kind of sometimes see the upwell imprint on the surface temperatures of the oceans, for a little while afterwards. It does kind of sometimes affect further development, This one's spiraling around here. There's a lot of upwell in it. So that water probably ain't going to be too conducive for further tropical storm enhancement for at least a few days afterwards. That's for sure. But That is pretty cool. So we got 3 storms. How about that, everyone? 3 storms. Boy, this is awesome, man. This is gonna be a fun weekend. We're gonna have fun this weekend. For those of you who are gonna be tuning in for the other weather chats, we'll do some tropical updates tomorrow afternoon. I know it's football tomorrow, so we'll take a look to see if any games are gonna get rained out again, like we had last week. Remember all those East Coast games because that front was sitting right there. That was pretty fun. This weekend we're dealing with hurricanes, but I don't think there's many Division One NCAA football teams in Maine. I don't think that's gonna be too much of an issue. Boston College in town? Or yeah, are they in town this? Let me double check here. Oh wait, I'm on my phone. Oh well. I mean, if they are, they're probably not going to be playing tomorrow. But anyways, that's not the point. All right, so fun time. And of course, for those of you who don't know, I'm a Penn State grad. Bachelor of meteorology. So that's always nice. I always root for that. Of course, my parents were also Penn Staters, so growing up where I grew up in Ohio, the Ohio State-Michigan game was, a national holiday in Northwest Ohio. You can't if you go anywhere in Northwest Ohio, nothing is scheduled on that day. That is the day for the Ohio State-Michigan game, and part of that has to do with the old Toledo War, way back when Michigan was trying to become a state. But that's a big game over there. So at school, I used to have the food drives around there. If you're a Michigan fan, put them over here. If you're an Ohio State fan, put them over because actually Ann Arbor is closer to Toledo than Columbus is. So there's actually is a high population of Michigan grads in Northwest Ohio, especially up around Toledo. Because again, part of the Toledo metro, could be argued includes Monroe County, Michigan, which they like to sometimes consider themselves Detroit, but then they like to consider themselves Toledo. Then sometimes they consider themselves their own thing. It's really interesting how that works on the metro list on the census. But that's not the point. The point is that I would always root for Penn State. That was always my team. That was Penn State. So I didn't really have too much invested into that game. But the Penn State-Ohio State game and the Penn State-Michigan game, those are big games in my house, and I've been to both of those games before. Growing up, I went to the big house, and then I went to the Horseshoe to see Penn State play in both of those games. All righty, everyone. That is tonight's weather chat, lecture. Wow, my hair is a mess. Whatever we call it. Hopefully you learned something interesting. Like I said, we're gonna have a fun time tomorrow. We got 3 systems to keep an eye on. That's pretty cool, isn't that? Yeah. Hurricane Lee, Margot, who's just having a fun time out there, I guess. And then we'll see. Like I said, I'm sorry I can't remember what the name will be, but it's gonna be an M and it'll be a female name. On a predetermined list, and as soon as I see it, I'm gonna say, oh, yep, that's what it was. So, anyways, hope y'all have a good rest of your evening. We'll be back here tomorrow. We'll do a few updates. And yeah, hope y'all have a good rest of your evening. It's Friday. Well, Friday night, I guess, at this point. All right. Hope y'all have a good one. See you back here tomorrow. Take care, everyone.